didn't know them quite as well now. This is what leads us to probably the most quintessentially Gen Z example, a gentleman by the name of Marcus Persson, or as he is known to many online, Notch.
It's about having it feel like a game. Like, what would you expect a game to do? Let's take the current speed and direction of the target and multiply it by some kind of constant.
Notch is a Swedish game developer who in 2009 began a humble little project known as Minecraft. I feel like I shouldn't have to elaborate too much here, but Minecraft is a sandbox video game which enables the user to build a multitude of structures and face off against a variety of monsters who descend upon the player at dusk. It has 4 modes: creative, survival, hardcore, and adventure, each for its own type of gamer, allowing for a very broad appeal indeed. Over the last decade and a bit, it has amassed cross-platform sales in excess of 230 million, making it the best-selling video game of all time by a significant margin. It has also received numerous awards, franchised itself to a dizzying extent, and established itself as a cultural force to be reckoned with. Its timeless appeal being typified by its continued creation of public figures who are likely just as publicly visible as the man behind the game. But in a way, I suppose it makes sense. Many individual developers are barely a fraction as well known as the games they create. They're most comfortable making the magic happen behind the scenes, and in the case of many games, it's hardly a singular effort, and very few people end up being standout figures. Audiences can't expect to learn the entire roster of a video game studio. Notch was different though. As the figurehead behind Minecraft, he set himself apart from faceless corporations and created a unique bond with his audience, utilizing the game's network and accompanying social media platforms to create this almost legendary figure in gaming circles who would interact and respond to feedback from many of the devoted audience. To many, Minecraft and Notch were inseparable. Well, until they weren't.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Were you the Minecraft guy?
No.
Cut to 2022 though, and trying to find any remnants of even the word Notch on Minecraft servers would be a challenge to even the most ardent user. Persson, unsurprisingly, had cashed out his shares in 2014, making a tidy $1.7 billion. And adopting a lifestyle that supported that. In many ways, he had done what many creatives wish they could do: walk away with a shit ton of money and have your legacy commemorated and honored by many users and creators. However, barely a couple years after he'd become a billionaire, Notch began to publicly head down a curious path, one that gradually became more and more questionable to those who looked on, and eventually resulted in Microsoft, the company who had bought out Minecraft, to cut all public ties with him in the hopes that a PR nightmare would be averted. It seems that in spite of his undeniable contribution to modern culture, certain people believe he would be better off forgotten altogether. Well, today we're going to be paying him a bit of time, taking a look at the man behind Minecraft, the mind that married the creation, the eventual and painful divorce, and what legacy may be left behind. Ladies, gentlemen, and all other flavors of quarks, I think it's best we go to the start. Dare I say it, to a world without Minecraft. Let's go. This video is sponsored by Aura, and the following ad is only suitable for US citizens. So if you're with me in old Blighty, then put on a cup of tea or something.
Austin, you're healing me. Heal me, you dumb.
Holly, I don't really think you deserve heals, to be honest.
Hey, it's me, Blood Oranges, from YouTube.
Play the game, Orange. Stop flogging your channel.
Guys, I think my channel just got hacked.
Wow, Jesus, really? Holy shit.
I saw like guys, I'm totally quitting Twitter. And you should give me all your money for like Tesla and crypto and stuff.
Can somebody pick off that Moira?
Oh yeah, you're flogging Teslas now, Austin. Elon's gonna be really hyped about that.
Shit, what am I even supposed to do right now? Do I contact support?
I do have one idea. Have you heard of Aura?
No. What is it?
Here, let me send you a link. It's a privacy and security app. Sounds like something you might need.
I don't even think I could afford something like that. And how exactly is that going to help me now?
Well, thanks to a special deal I've been cooking up. You can get 2 weeks absolutely free, so you don't have to worry about the cost while you are testing it out. www.aura.com/opinion. Preferably you'd make use of Aura before something bad happens, but as it already has, we're going to try and stop the hackers in their tracks. Do you still have access to your accounts?
Okay, hold on a sec.
Dude, please heal me. Focus on the game.
Yes.
Okay, good then. This will be easy. What we're going to do is kick out the hackers from your accounts before they change anything else, and then make use of Aura's 256 AES encrypted password manager to generate new, stronger passwords to make sure they never do this again. Aura also lets you know if your current passwords are weak, and crucially, if your passwords have been involved in data breaches and are exposed on the dark web.
Is anyone gonna sort out that Reinhardt who keeps kicking my
Oh,
ass?
wow, that was really easy. I was honestly worried there for a second.
Well, Aura makes staying safe online easy. If you think that's good, wait till you hear about what else it can do. My friend's been getting all these spam calls and emails due to data brokers profiting off selling private information. Aura will identify those data brokers that are selling your information and automatically send them opt-out requests on your behalf. Aura also does real-time credit and identity theft monitoring and has a VPN with an antivirus. Typically, you'd have to pay for those separate features, but here you can get it all in one app.
Thank you, James. And I mean it seriously. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Austin. You're most welcome. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up right now with my link, www.aura.com/opinion, Aura will give you a 2-week free trial. Now, back to the video.
Can we group up already?
The decade is the 1980s. Technology is emerging pretty quickly, with various movements in the industry taking the world by storm, with many pieces of media romanticizing its popularity. However, enthusiasm for that sector was still treated with disdain by some, and as many 80s coming-of-age films will likely tell you, the cool kids were still the ones who could flatten some poor sod in a game of football. For many, forms of technology were an outlet to keep them away from the toxic social hierarchies they felt they couldn't compete in. And by the 80s, one of the very important branches of technology was the video game. In early times, you would have to commute to the arcade to have a taste of what video games actually entailed. But with the increased commercial reach and accessibility of consoles, the market opened up much more to those who enjoyed the pastime of gaming. Not just one of those people who wasn't really interested in being the coolest at school. Deeply fascinated by mechanics from a young age, he spent much of his time indoors, initially taking a keen interest in Lego, but soon turning his attention to his personal Commodore 128 computer, either playing it or programming it, much of the time with codes from a magazine network that his father was subscribed to. At the age of 8, he produced his first video game, one that he reassuringly informed an interviewer was basic. Back then, these sorts of pastimes were vocational to many. Very few people knew exactly where artificial intelligence would be in 20 years' time, with some still arguing the idea that an online network could never be achieved, and others claiming it would just be a fad regardless. But over the years, it continued to defy many of its detractors, with persisting developments and watershed moments that set the bar higher and higher in scientific accomplishment. With an expanding industry in an expanding market, a person who had dropped out of high school likely sensed an opportunity. His mother put him on a programming course to hone his talent, and by the time he was 18, he had his first job. After a few rocky periods in between, he was one of the first developers hired by a Stockholm-based company then known as Midas Player, later to become King, the corporation who made the legendary Candy Crush saga, inescapable from the daily lives of all, from our phones to our skylines. Person worked on a fair few games during his 4 to 5 year stint at the company. However, he always kept one of his eyes on a few side projects that he would work on in his free time, developing a fair few games to boot. In 2006, he released the Java-based game Worm Online, a game he had developed with longtime friend Rolf Jensen, a sandbox MMO where players could construct buildings, mine for materials, and craft tools. Sound familiar? Well, there were a few differences. It's definitely a bit more complex, probably leaning more into games like RuneScape for its more detailed visuals and skill level system that provides people with a clear roadmap to mastery of the arts. However, there's also a more factional element that allows people to join villages and alliance, declare on others if they want, alongside a religious system that allows people to worship a certain deity, each one having their own unique perks. It provides an arrangement where users essentially create their own lore and history within the game. It's a clever system, and the game does appear to have some popularity to this day. But in 2007, the year after Worm was first released, Notch stepped away from his commitment to the game and the studio, then known as Mojang Specifications AB. Despite moving on from this venture, Person wished to retain the namesake Mojang for his next project. However, afraid of market competition, Midas Player barred him and all employees from making games in their free time. However, clearly valuing his individual creativity, Notch responded by quitting his job, taking up work at a friendlier employer, and dedicating the following months to replicating a game by the name of Infiniminer. Infiniminer is a block-based sandbox game in which a player harvests minerals by cutting through procedurally generated maps. Sound familiar? Well, yeah, this one should really. Infiniminer was released by indie developer Zachtronics, named after its founder, Zach Barth. It wasn't particularly hyped on release and hadn't created large groundswell after, but it caught the attention of Marcus, who said that although it had clear character, still left a lot to the imagination. At the time, Marcus had been working on a project known as Ruby Dung, a base building game in which he had experimented with a feature that enabled first-person perspective, but ultimately felt it was too undeveloped in its current format. Although Persson admired many aspects of Infiniminer, he wished to create an environment that leaned into the more RPG theme, one that would emphasize survival in the wilderness. He also wanted to focus on details of the in-game experience, sound effects that would relate to each individual action and how a player base may respond to that. On May the 13th, 2009, Notch, using an account by the name of Nizoch on YouTube, posted a video titled Cave Game Tech Tests. This upload was well received by users at the time, and a couple days later he seemed to have settled on a name: Minecraft. In this time, Notch continued to post updates to his YouTube channel and personal Tumblr blog that followed progress on the game pretty closely. 4 days after posting Cave Game Tech Test, he opened up the game to the public, providing users with a link if they wish to play it themselves. Notch predominantly used forums for the independent game source to distribute his new project, the same one that he had found Infiniminer on. There wasn't any real big promotional push, nor was there any large investment from companies who believed in the project. It was the true definition of an indie game. Just over 20 years after he had created his first game on the Commodore 128, he had published a humble sandbox game on Java. But the world was a lot larger now and dominated by companies who had a million times the resources of a person like Persson's. Indie games were a dime a dozen, and Notch's couldn't have been that unique, right? Very few people know when they're making their magnum opus that it will be their magnum opus. You can speculate how people will receive it, but you can never foresee public reaction, and you can never account for every single issue that a consumer might point out. When Notch first made the game playable, there were more than enough issues to count, and many people were the first to let him know. However, there was definitely something unique about Minecraft from the off. I'm not going to go through every detail because there are creators out there who are much more enthusiastic than me and have made far more in-depth videos. But I think the best way to summarize would be to say that it, on one hand, being a rather simple sandbox, allowed for a rather broad range of virtual realities, one where a world could be built around your vision. At the same time, the RPG element, the first-person perspective, gave it a more competitive element and rewarded a person for proficiency and skills required for survival. Whereas Notch's previous game, Worm, had a system built on levels that was meant to supply an outward motive for mastery, Minecraft's was inherent. It was a simple system, but it was one that worked, and one that you progressed through naturally. A bedrock so basic that can create a world so complex. I think the best thing that can be said about the game is that you never have the exact same experience twice. And for many, that was embodied by the existence of Minecraft. The familiar aspects were there, you never had to relearn the fundamentals, there was never an alienation of experience, and many of the processes were as simple as a few clicks. But the opportunities branched off each time you decided to take your experience to the world in a new direction. The visual design was unvarnished, making it undemanding to PCs and accessible to many users, but still retaining its own charm and feeling that it was intentional. It was also assisted by a bare-bones yet effective soundtrack and sound design by C418, another frequent user of the independent game source forum. His work can be identified by most from a single chord, and that's impressive. Yet a game is more than its premise, and can never be flawless on launch. That couldn't be more applicable to a game like Minecraft, which Notch decided to make playable from the preliminary stages of production. Now, Notch couldn't necessarily afford his own game testers, so he relied on the feedback from users. You could tell that when it was first published, it was still in its teething era. Although many people enjoyed it, Marcus was inundated with recommendations and requests from gamers who felt their experience could be enhanced. And Notch was on it, regularly responding to people and applying updates as soon as his day job was finished. Within 3 days of making the alpha open to all users, he had added a variety of features and continued to do so over the coming weeks, including a multiplayer mode at the turn of June. Much of this was conferred through the forums, but it soon expanded to his personal blog and equivalent social media that became dedicated to following the progress of the game as it garnered more and more interest from the wider internet. With the increasing popularity and knowledge that he would probably need funds to sustain development, Notch moved the game into a paid alpha stage for those who wanted a few more modes at their disposal. Unlike a lot of indie games trying to capitalize on the popularity, Notch actually made the decision to make his game a bit more expensive than he had initially valued it, linking an essay explaining the importance of not underselling indie games. Despite this, many people happily obliged and continued to spread the word, leading to a snowball effect that resulted in more and more users. Videos, tweets, posts onto a variety of social media websites continued to serve as Notch's own unpaid promotional campaign, and gave Person all the time he wanted to focus on quality control. And to be fair to him, that's exactly what he did. With the rate of unexpected success that Notch was experiencing, it would have been easy for him to rest on his laurels or sell his work on to an eager investor. However, with each passing day, he only seemed to dedicate more and more time to perfecting and updating the craft of this humble mining game. His proactiveness in actually attending to problems and responding to feedback didn't seem to let up, even as the game seemingly expanded beyond a single person's capability. He switched his day job to part-time, hired a couple people to help him manage designs, but still placed himself at the creative control panel of this undertaking, maintaining activity and status of the forums that had so graciously supported his project. He was still a one-man army, and amongst many was quickly obtaining status as a bit of a cult figure. However, things were beginning to spiral out of control a little. In the first year, the game moved around 25,000 copies, pretty good for an indie game. But in 2010, it began to garner even more traction, selling thousands of copies in the space of a day. So much income was being generated from sales that, suspecting fraud, PayPal froze his account, which subsequently just generated more publicity. I mean, the dude was literally keeping hundreds of thousands in his PayPal. Although Notch was on top of his game, he didn't seem to be on top of his fame. There were some things that he just could not do on his own. Enter stage right, Valve, the video game's mammoth headed by another popular figure, Gabe Newell. Noticing the success of Minecraft and the man behind it, they invited him over to Bellevue, Washington to see what the prospects of future work could be. They showed him around the headquarters, made him take some programming assessments, even having him meet with President Mr. Newell himself. All in all, it was quite the experience. And although they believed he had a bit to learn, they were happy to offer him a job that would hopefully provide him with a bit of stability. However, that wasn't the only thing that happened in Bellevue.
I should have brought something.
There's Notch. And here's the crowd.
When Notch announced he was traveling to Valve headquarters in the US, many people asked him if a meetup was possible. Person, thinking it could be a nice initiative, decided to announce the meeting on his Tumblr blog, jovially labeling it MinecraftCon, stating that it could be a good idea, even if it's just 3 people sitting around in uncomfortable silence for 20 minutes. It wasn't quite that though. In fact, over 50 people turned up, including one person in a full creeper costume. Although it didn't last for more than a few hours, it might just have been enough to convince Notch that although Valve's offer was likely flattering, there may be something more worthwhile in what he already had. So he turned down the move to Valve and instead called up his longtime friend Jakob Purser, expressing the desire to take this whole little Minecraft gig a little bit more seriously. But was that what Notch wanted? Upon returning to Sweden, Person and Pulsar incorporated their business as Mojang AB, later to be Mojang Studios, and brought on some additional manpower to their workforce. They decided to commit a bit more time to game development in general, even beginning to work on another game called Scrolls, though it's now known as Caller's Bane. It seems the wheels were firmly in motion on the Mojang machine, and not too soon after, Notch was vindicated for his decision made in September, because Minecraft's growth didn't slow. In fact, it did quite the opposite, even beginning to capture the attention of mainstream media sources. Less than 20 days after his visit to Bellevue, a YouTube video on Minecraft topped the platform's gaming charts for the first time, and by the end of October, they had moved 500,000 copies. And by the end of the year, PC Gamer UK had heralded it as the Game of the Year, all while still in beta. In many ways, the offer from Valve is just what someone like Notch needed. This was a dude who had seemed to have been out of his depth at the time. Hell, he was storing hundreds of thousands of pounds in his PayPal account. It felt like the backing of a more stable source of income was just what he needed. However, something tells me Notch didn't bank his success on the amount of income his little project generated. Nobody could have foreseen the success of a humble game initially posted onto an independent forum, especially Person, and really his ability to follow this through wouldn't depend on the amount of money he made, but more his own spark for the game. Something that he clearly still believed he possessed.
Does it just still make you happy to just keep working on the game every day?
Yeah, so far it is. We got another game, a big prototype, and it's really fun to think about that. But so far the most fun is when I can actually just work on Minecraft.
With the attention of major developers like Valve, it would have been very easy to let his elevated status get to him. But like a lot of accidental celebrities, Notch didn't really seem to view himself as one. He just wanted to keep working on his project. But that was at least somewhat difficult as the user base continued to manifest. He didn't make the game early access to the entire world with the intent of having the entire world play it. He had to adapt, and the new business model seemed like the best way forward. With a new business, there are new responsibilities, particularly if a game wants to continue to rule the market. In 2011, to consolidate their prosperity, the Mojang crew began to work on new versions for other platforms, initially for mobile devices, but console projects followed not too long after. The company also made the decision to start publishing games from other indie studios. Additionally, after the success of the spontaneous meetup in 2010, it was decided that Minecon would become an official event. It was planned to occur from the 18th to the 19th of October in Las Vegas. Everything was moving forward pretty smoothly. But was that the case for our title character? Notch really was the first of his kind in many ways, and he was certainly one of the first who became known among many for just being a developer. Although that was partly attributable to the success of the game, it was also credit to his hands-on nature and natural interest in the community that surrounded it. It was clear that he didn't wish to take any single person for granted. However, there's a reason that sort of approach isn't typically linked to celebrities. To put it plainly, it's impossible to maintain. I'd say the best allegory is that of the YouTube channel, really. There are people who, when they start their channel, will respond to every single comment and try and give as much attention to anybody who takes an interest in their work. But the attention may grow to the point where you cannot tangibly engage with everyone without sacrificing other aspects of the creative process. What people loved Notch for was a quality that would inevitably become incompatible with his status, and with that comes a few complications. When you have a small project, the first people who believe in it and support it are some of the most important supporters you can have, as they're the ones who may help you find your feet and momentum. If you reciprocate that positive attention, then these people will enjoy engaging with you because many of them appreciate being listened to and their voice actually having influence. As a project grows, their voice will be diluted though, and this leads to more dissatisfaction, the allegations that you sold out, that you're not who you used to be, you become lazy, etc. And you're going to come across people with completely conflicting visions of what you should do with your content, which often just leads to nobody being satisfied. Some of these dedicated individuals were also becoming increasingly obsessed with Notch's life, including to the point where someone created a timeline of his in-work absences. Even if he tried his utmost hardest, there was no way that Notch's position was sustainable, and over 2011, as pressure continued to rise, it was clear that he was, as they would say, suffering from success. In a Reddit AMA in April 2011, Notch acknowledges his nature to overstress and focus on the negativity, particularly over a runaway success like Minecraft. However, also says he has made a commitment to managing it better. He seemed to be doing an okay job at managing that at first, but over the year this struggle appeared to resurface. This likely wasn't alleviated when Bethesda filed a lawsuit claiming the game Scrolls was too similar to the Elder Scrolls, which led to a month-long legal back and forth. Notch prevailed, but at what cost? This seemed to climax in the 2011 Minecon, which also marked the official release of Minecraft. There was every reason to celebrate. However, it was marked by an incident involving a couple YouTubers, part of the channel known as the Yogscast.
I guess it's fixed now?
I don't know.
The nether?
I didn't
and
think
we're
so.
we're finally going to go through it.
I'm excited, Simon.
Oh my god. I'm terrified. But we got backup. There's 4 of us now.
In their time, the Yogscast were one of the largest and most influential gaming channels on YouTube. Some of their members were also enthusiastic devotees of Minecraft, and Notch in return sang his praises for their work. So their appearance at Minecon 2011 should have been a match made in heaven. However, not too long after their appearance on the final night, a sleep-deprived Notch sent a series of enraged tweets that called out the pair for their supposed delinquent behavior, which included cursing, insulting, and all-around incendiary behavior. Yogscast responded on their subreddit, disputing Notch's version of events and criticizing the general organization of Minecon. This tension persisted for a day or so before Notch relented and put out another statement apologizing for his approach and admitting it was likely a stress-related misunderstanding. At the height of his success, Notch should have at least been enjoying himself, yet it seemed that it was anything but that, and it's not surprising. He was never a person who enjoyed the public spotlight, and this increased level of tension, especially at an event like Minecon, was only going to escalate that further. The guy needed a break, but would he ever get it?
What about the gaming world? Because every time I look at it, like, I looked you up on the internet and stuff, and it seems like there's quite a lot of bitchiness in your world. Like, quite a lot of people are like, I hate him, he created Minecraft, how dare he not be me? You know, that kind of thing. Is it a very bitchy world, you think?
As noted, Notch's approach to management wasn't really one that adapted to the levels of attention that he received. He didn't do it badly for what it was worth, but eventually you can't keep up with the continued public analysis of your existence, particularly when it's committed to a game that should really enable you to block out the world around you. So approximately a couple weeks after the official launch of Minecraft and Notch's little incident with the Yogscast, he announced he was stepping down as head programmer. The title of the post is in Swedish, a statement meaning "with those words I hand over the microphone," with the rest of the short blog elaborating on a statement. The new head designer, Jens Bergensten, also known as Jeb, had been working hard on developing the game Scrolls. Person was impressed by his work and felt like he was the right person to take the game forward. He doesn't really talk too much about his own mental state, only saying that he will rest for a while, but intends to continue to help out Minecraft. With all things considered, this was probably the right decision. It would ease the public expectation while still allowing him to offer insight and ideas for his brainchild. Bergensten is by no means anonymous, and I don't want to suggest that, but Notch was still the face of the company in many regards, just one that had been stretched a bit too thin over the past few years. But would that be enough? Well, I think the key is perspective, really. The move as it had been presented was one for person's own well-being. However, I think that Notch had to believe it himself, because whether he liked it or not, people still primarily associated Minecraft with him above anything else. And with that in mind, there were still going to be people who held him responsible for the upkeep of the game, even if it wasn't technically his obligation at all. Notch had to simply accept that these people would exist and stop caring about them. I think one of the problems with Notch is that he couldn't really escape his status. I think the move lifted some mandate to do work off his shoulders, but otherwise he was still the center of attention, particularly as an avid Twitter user. He also wasn't really much of a professional when it came to his content. This wasn't an insult really, but as you know, many companies make their public representation as bereft in personality as possible. Notch always presented himself as a friend of the user. Unlike a lot of large companies, his stance on piracy was mostly different, occasionally even encouraging people. He resented large companies for their acquisitions, such as Google taking over YouTube. He came across as a video game populist, but I think having such stances is always going to come with its perils. Notch was still a significant force in a lot of decisions made around Mojang. Sure, he wasn't the #1 guy for design, but as I'm sure he found out soon enough, running a company came with more than enough baggage of its own. And eventually, although you can find his position as an advocate for consumers respectable, you soon realize why a lot of companies don't have that sort of representation. Ultimately, Notch still bore the brunt of the decisions made by the company, even ones not made by himself, so he was regularly bombarded with requests that he could not fulfill without going over Jeb's head, something that he had pledged not to do. However, if he didn't enact those changes, he'd be subject to a litany of rather unpleasant words, something that he took more personally than he should have. He was an inherently high-stress person who wanted to solve every person's issue but knew he shouldn't. Being the video game populist isn't easy when he was no longer the friendly game developer behind the screen and had a multi-million-dollar franchise to oversee. In the end, Notch became much more preoccupied with covering the decisions that concerned business, sometimes dealing with complaints from large companies who weren't happy that people were recreating their content in Minecraft. On the other side, people were dissatisfied every time he made an executive decision that people felt may have affected a player's in-game experience, even if it was one he felt was the right thing to do or absolutely necessary. The sandbox format, which in many ways was the game's core appeal, also began to generate some controversy of its own over the years. Now, in many ways, what happens in a game like Minecraft is a player's own discretion, and developers can't be expected to intervene in every server that offends people's sensibilities, particularly on a game with the number of servers that Minecraft has. However, as the antics became more and more far-fetched, pressure began to mount, ultimately climaxing in a situation regarding in-game transactions. It was mid-2014, summer was approaching quickly, but it was not all sunshine on the Minecraft servers. Discourse had flared up on Twitter, as it always does, on the issue of donating to servers that offer certain services. Responding to this, Mojang spokesperson Owen Hill explained that although people are more than welcome to donate to servers, it couldn't be in exchange for equipment that gave you an in-game advantage. Soft pay to win, essentially. However, many users didn't agree with this and began a hashtag titled Save Minecraft. Although this stance was not new for Mojang, they were not known to have enforced it, and this newfound attention drew ire from many users who felt there were many good servers whose existence relied on such transactions. Notch, frustrated by the decision surrounding the topic, did what he did best, and took to his personal blog to write a response explaining his perspective, and explained that nothing had changed. This had always been their stance on the matter, as written in the EULA, the End User License Agreement. They did not want to sacrifice the don't pay for the gameplay principle that had motivated them all this time. Nevertheless, the user base did not subside, some of whom pointing towards the recent Minecraft Realms release as being a motivating factor for Mojang's decision to turn their attention towards other paid servers. Realms was launched the month before and allowed a person to pay £8 a month to have private servers for up to 20 friends. This large-scale service drew comparisons that maybe Minecraft was trying to decrease competition, not truly acting in the interest of users, which likely provoked a more cynical response from gamers. Notch, from his perspective, clearly felt like he was doing the right thing, and he always took a lot of pride in it. He was always facing off with the sect of people who believed he was acting in his own self-interest, and with the large-scale movement against the decision that he felt was pretty cut and dry was the final straw. So on the 16th of June, a frustrated and enraged Notch typed out a tweet in the heat of the moment. And everything changed. Anyone want to buy my share of Mojang so I can move on with my life? Getting hate for trying to do the right thing is not my gig. The tweet in question wasn't a serious business proposition, but it did catch the attention of a few serious businesses who contacted Notch's colleagues and asked him if he was for real. At first unsure, the idea of being able to completely disassociate from all the burdens he felt saddled with began to inspire some ideas. Every major company knew the cash cow that Mojang was, a business with less than 50 employees, yet generating hundreds of millions in revenue each year. It was a corporate wet dream, and if they were going to sell, there was hardly a gaming behemoth that didn't want a slice. However, it didn't take too long for the frontrunner to emerge. That frontrunner was the humble, small-scale firm known as Microsoft.
So how do you run your Minecraft company? Have you sold out to the evil corporations yet?
No, not yet. We hope not to.
Now, to be fair, the company had to be somewhat large to even afford to buy out the shares on offer. We'll get to the price of the deal in a bit, but Notch wanted a company who were in touch with the preservation of what made Minecraft special. He had dealt with Microsoft before, occasionally expressing frustration with their practices, but regularly also demonstrating affection for those who he worked with to bring Minecraft to their platforms, even at some points promoting rumors of an exclusivity deal, which he seemed to sarcastically refer to. All I can affirmatively say is they were probably a better choice to Notch than EA. With this in mind, Microsoft moved in to close the deal. They had the additional motive of the ever-wholesome subject of tax avoidance. Due to our functioning economic system, a deal with Mojang would facilitate. You love to see it. So they were prepared to offer the big bucks. And when I say big, I mean hard to even quantify. Person's shares totaled just shy of $1.8 billion. Poe says around 300 million, and then CEO Carl Manet's shares 100 million. Not your average shopping bill, to say the least. This is all finalized and officially announced on the 15th of September 2014, with a post on Notch's Tumblr titled "I'm Leaving Mojang," which goes more into depth about how interactions with his user base had shaped his current perspective. He already knew he would never be able to recreate a success like Minecraft, but wanted to stay on as the figurehead because he believed there was some symbolic value to that. However, he came to the conclusion that he didn't enjoy it. He was just really this face on a game that he didn't really feel attached to anymore, a source of people's enjoyment and pain that he didn't understand. In his words, he's merely a nerdy computer programmer who likes to have opinions on Twitter. Although the money was nothing to turn your nose at, he stresses that it wasn't about the money, it was about the sanity. I wonder how people would respond to that. Well, most of them took it pretty well, actually. There were a few people who regarded him as a sellout, but he'd been called a sellout by plenty of people in his time, and that wasn't anything new. It was obviously difficult for some people to rationalize given that person had always been outspoken about a lot of the threatening overreach of big tech. But his move wasn't really one for any of the companies. It wasn't an endorsement of such, it was just what he thought was best for himself. He had to get out, and that was his way. Among other people affected by this were the members of staff. Upon learning on his departure, they were reported to be disappointed. And that makes sense, especially given they were now under the gaze of a much more cutthroat company. But Notch had taken steps to ensure that no layoffs would occur, which given the modest numbers of Mojang's workforce, Microsoft were happy to abide by. All staff members who remained at the company for the next 6 months also received a $300,000 bonus from Notch's share, which obviously wasn't anything near the levels of money Marcus had been paid, but it wasn't derisory either. It was generally reported that Microsoft mostly took a hands-off approach and merely offered their resources and investment to the team over at Mojang in exchange for the profits they were making. Overall, it was considered by most to be an example of a transaction done right, one that didn't lead to the immediate demise of a product or those who worked tirelessly on it. At the same time, although you'd be hard-pressed not to understand person's viewpoint, it's hard not to feel a bit solemn about the circumstances that precipitated it. Although Person's tenure probably did centralize his status a bit too much, I mean hell, he once placed above Barack Obama in a Time Person of the Year poll. His success was still an inspiration to many. He'd become representative of an individual creative using the online world to make something greater than any major studio could ever concoct, and his concern for personally involving himself in creating a consumer-based experience felt refreshing for many who played the game. It created a community with an identifiable figure at the center of it. His departure didn't mean the game was suddenly going to take a nosedive, and in a way, some people's fallacious belief that he was one of the key factors in maintaining the game's appeal was disproven after he left. But it did reduce the power of the community on a large company who isn't really known for their consumer empowerment. Eventually, those aspects of corporatism were going to seep in, and there'd be nothing that anyone could do about it. Sometimes it's nice just to have someone there to listen. Ultimately, this was all rooted in a situation, though, where the person who listened had heard enough. Anyone who cares that much about a game is not going to be able to withstand the pressure of maintaining it. Minecraft was one person's passion that became so much greater than that. In Notch's statement, he writes, "If I ever accidentally make something that seems to gain traction, I'll probably abandon it immediately." Some people may have been able to navigate the tricky social environment better, but Notch was not that person. He never was. That's what made him popular. That's what made him liked. He was the everyman. He was the underdog who rose up to change the gaming industry. He didn't have politically adept social skills or a decade-long college education. He was a guy who just did what he felt like doing. He showed that the stereotype of the nerd staying in his room on his computer wasn't as negative as some thought it to be. In the end, the popularity made his status untenable, though. He couldn't be everybody's everyman, but he still walked away from a game that would revere him as one of the greatest examples of independent enterprise in modern history. Well, he could have. Marcus Persson was rich, and everyone knew it. It's hard not to let success change you in some way, and often you should change with success because it typically places you in a different position than one you were in previously. Even if you didn't intend on becoming famous, if you're going to continue operating in that domain, you have to adapt. While he was working on Minecraft, Notch seemed hesitant to do that. In 2011, he made over $100 million, and his response to questions on how he was going to spend it was perhaps obtaining a driver's license and a car, almost comedically modest. When he did splash out, it was only really with other people, such as work trips and conventions. He obviously cared less about his shopping bill than most, but he never seemed to let that wealth distract him from the lifestyle that he was accustomed to. However, the sale of his shares in Minecraft changed that, not just because it earned him an obscene amount of money at once, but because it removed a commitment that he had felt attached to for years. As long as he was tied to that game, no matter how much money he made, Notch seemed almost paranoid that it could still collapse at any moment. He waited over a year to fully quit his job, despite the fact that Minecraft was generating far more income. Even when success seemed near guaranteed, Notch felt the reputation of a game weighing on his actions. That was gone now, and he had all the time to do what he wanted to. Well, what would he do? He decided to treat himself, it seems. First on his list of goodies was a new abode. Persson went for the ever-popular celebrity location in Beverly Hills, spending $70 million and outbidding Jay-Z and Beyonce on a 23,000 square foot mansion with its own car lift. How quaint. It was soon reported that he had been spending his nights in Las Vegas blowing upwards of $100K in a single outing to the nightclubs, casinos, and the rest. In interviews, his mantra appeared that he was making up for lost time and everything he was never able to do as a young adult working his ass off in the industry. He acknowledged that it wasn't the wisest way to spend one's fortunes, but it was for him. He was living the high life, that much is true. Private rooftop pools, Cristal champagne, and Skrillex. The ultimate triad. This was all shared through his Twitter and Instagram, which now served a very different purpose for Notch, and his attitude certainly reflected that. When people tried to dunk on him, he'd regularly respond with memes and light-hearted jibes to show that ultimately, whatever people said wouldn't change where he was at with life. In spite of all this, he had pledged to donate a fair sum of his money to charity and set some aside for family. But life is more than what you want to do with money. What other plans did he have? Well, it appeared uncertain. On the 3rd of March 2015, an interview was published with Forbes that delved into the headspace of Notch following the sale. It reported that he had since started a new company known as Rubber Brain, located in central Stockholm. Him and his colleagues had been throwing around some new ideas and occasionally testing them, but mostly just trying to have a good time. Whatever their plans were, it wasn't to create a new blockbuster. On the question of his place in the current gaming environment, he didn't really know where he wanted to be. But one thing was certain, that he hadn't regretted selling his shares. He just wanted to pass away the days having a good time with his friends. But how long would that last? I have a good friend who posited a principle in a philosophical discussion we were having a few months ago. The necessity of human struggle. His argument basically suggested that we as people need to experience some aspect of adversity to truly feel fulfilled. He likened it to a room that closes in on a person, the idea that many of us need those walls to push back against, something of a challenge, or else we ultimately lose our own purpose in the world. Now, obviously, some people struggle far too much and other people get by alright without struggling. But I think there is a relevance, particularly for people who are used to some form of pressure, to have that completely removed from them. It's a very difficult environment to adapt to. Struggle is relative, and if you spent your whole life with this strong sense of purpose, to have yourself completely absolved of that purpose is quite jarring. And barely a few months after the Forbes article was published, Notch's celebratory tone appeared to take a turn towards something more pessimistic. On August the 29th, Notch sent out a series of tweets that appeared to lament his current lifestyle, initiating with the statement, "The problem with getting everything is you run out of reasons to keep trying, and human interaction becomes impossible due to imbalance." Notch then proceeds to talk about how although he has everything, he feels completely alienated, unable to create a human connection with those around him, especially on an intimate basis as people find his lifestyle overwhelming. He also seems frustrated at the fact that many of his former colleagues still seem to resent him, despite him believing that he treated them well. When one of the employees says that much of the response was just the initial shock, he completely flips out on them, saying, "Fuck all of you," which seemed a bit much for many people at the time. He had no trust for the world around him, and it showed. The meltdown may have been momentary for many, but it certainly outlined a real cloud to the silver lining of selling out. Unfortunately, Notch had reached this stage of success and influence where people treat you differently because of it. Even people close to you can seem distant, and you can't really trust their intent. You need mental fortitude to manage that, and to be frank, Marcus was a somewhat fragile person, and once the initial euphoria of that newfound wealth wore out, he probably wondered what was left. This brief tirade inspired a few reports and response articles from people who didn't necessarily have great sympathy for his predicament, but probably prompted the same suggestion for a solution. The person needed to find a way to alienate himself from that wealth and status. It's not an easy solution to undertake, but the problem will continue to be inescapable as long as he had nothing to work for and nobody to actually share it with. Snoop Dogg even weighed in on the matter, reminding persons that knowing who your real ones are is much more important than any material wealth. I don't think anyone needs Notch's level of money to be happy. You shouldn't have to give away your wealth to be happy necessarily, but you need to have something that can transcend the purpose of that money, whether that be friends, work, or an alternative outlet. Reflecting on Notch's life, maybe his purpose was rooted in a struggle of sorts with Minecraft and optimizing it, and now that it ended, so had Person's own greater sense of self. Marcus Person was rich, and everyone knew it, but for someone like him, that was seeming more like a curse than a blessing, and his rant, although aggressive, was a show of great vulnerability. He needed something greater to latch onto, but maybe we got something worse. A few days after his venting session on the social media website, Notch decided to respond to those who suggested that he give his wealth away, stating that money wasn't the problem, it was the lifestyle. And although he may not be wrong, if you let your money influence your lifestyle, then you're feeding the problem. And less than a couple months later, he was back in Vegas. He seemed to attribute his current downcast mindset to the success, but he'd been successful for a while. It was just that this time round, he had something else to account for that success, and it simply wasn't enough. It distanced himself from nearly everyone in his life and made him untrusting of the world around him. Notch was the paranoid wreck who had no idea of where he was meant to go from here, and expressing it online wasn't going to help, as the whole place can often feel like you're headed in circles. You think that after he sold his shares, he'd have a lot less to say on the World Wide Web, but for someone who didn't want to be the center of attention anymore, he often still seemed obsessed with social media platforms. In his departure post, he characterized himself as a nerdy computer programmer who likes to have opinions on Twitter. But it seemed more than just the occasional hot takes at this point. To be honest, he seemed ever more invested with the goings-on around him, and that only continued to manifest itself as the online world became increasingly political. As we all know, 2016 was a strange time for the internet on reflection, particularly with the cosmic rise of Donald Trump and the general movement towards anti-SJW content that seemed to target people who were not always the best at expressing their beliefs. When working on Minecraft, Notch had generally seemed to adopt quite progressive ideas towards his game. Although not overtly political, he said that every character was genderless and that people had a right to interpret each of them to their own liking. It was part of Minecraft after all, the fact that an individual can have an experience personal to them. Despite not explicitly endorsing anyone before 2016, Notch was someone who would have been mostly aware of the discourse within political spheres. And throughout 2015, he had mostly expressed disdain for the prospective Republican candidate, Donald Trump, calling him a loon, and exhibited genuine confusion at people's belief in his suitability for office. He'd interacted with a few YouTubers who expressed anti-SJW beliefs and stated that he would support Bernie Sanders if choosing between him and Hillary. As the US election approached, he seemed to become more and more invested in the issue though. Although he's vocal that he was not a fan of Trump's, he turned most of his ire towards Hillary Clinton, who he felt had acted dishonestly. I'm not going to go into every single detail regarding his political beliefs at this specific point in time, but as election day approached, his stance on Trump continued to soften, and eventually he admitted that if he was forced to choose between Trump and Clinton, he would probably choose Trump. This wasn't an exceptional stance at the time. Particularly online, people's resentment for Clinton was very palpable, and many didn't want her to win just for the principle that they thought the Democrats had the opportunity to present a genuinely radical candidate. Well, at least by the standards of US politics. Trump became the anti-hero, anti-establishment figure that in spite of his very visible flaws became a punishment to all those happy to settle for a miserable status quo. Therefore, although his opinions were a little outspoken for a person of his status, these didn't exactly strike anyone as truly frightening. I think establishment is a very important word to use when analyzing these figures, because Notch is an independent game developer who cared deeply about the game he designed, similarly saw himself as a figure taking on the long-entrenched bureaucracies and structures that they employ to stay in power. He'd always believed that many in the industry players sacrificed user experience for their own gain, and they would try and oppress any actual innovation. Notch was one of the few large gaming entrepreneurs who didn't outwardly attack matters like piracy. He was an advocate for the little guy and in-game experience. Additionally, he had always been largely skeptical of national governments and expressed deep concern about a surveillance state, particularly that relating to the US. That is where we introduce a sort of SJW that he also seemed to rally against during the election of Donald Trump, additionally accrediting their behavior as much the reason that the Don got elected. The sort of political correctness that many of them preached was not something that Notch had ever related to. Sure, he wasn't the sort of person who was particularly offensive or hurtful to people, but he always saw issues like freedom of speech as being non-negotiable. He saw any attack on it as an act of tyranny designed to oppress people who may speak truth to power. He wanted to fight against what he saw as this corporate sterilization of people's expression. He was also becoming increasingly involved in issues relating to the treatment of, quote, white men, and the use of identity politics in general. Now, I wouldn't describe any of his positions as hateful, or even with the intent to do harm at this point. Sometimes I think he spoke from a point of genuine frustration towards toxic factions in many movements who were advocating for otherwise righteous causes. However, his frustration didn't subside in the year following, particularly with the online world further contorting.
Come on, buddy.
We have a major projection right now. Donald Trump will take Ohio. And CNN projects Donald Trump will carry the state of Florida. Huge win for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, we project, will win in Kentucky, in Indiana, with its 11 electoral votes.
But why should it matter to someone like Marcus Persson? The dude wasn't the target of this, and it's not like his freedom was being affected by it. Well, at the start of 2017, a few large YouTubers, most notably PewDiePie, came under scrutiny for their behavior online. At the time, many who sympathized with these creators saw large corporations punching down on the freedom of expression previously held by many creators, whether or not the humor was in good taste. In particular, this sort of battle emerged all over the internet between traditional standards and the sort of Wild West approach that other parts of the online world possessed, and how increasingly influential in modern culture they were becoming. The online world and their communities were facing down reproval from many angles, especially from those who felt it excluded and alienated marginalized groups who deserved a space as much as anyone else. This all then reached into the video game industry, particularly given the aftermath of Gamergate, something that Notch had previously stayed rather neutral on, but now seemed to feel quite strongly about. This criticism of the current online culture was often advocated by progressively identifying people, the SJWs per se, who were also vociferously anti-Trump. I think a fair few people who were attached to that sort of wild west of the internet drew a correlation between Trump and a specific way of online life, particularly that freedom of speech, given how Trump was a pretty unfiltered person, to say it lightly. Well, with infinite time and money, I guess Notch had finally found another struggle, but was this one worth fighting for? Marcus Persson had always held a sort of morbid curiosity for these sorts of areas. Discussing the often contentious 4chan in an early interview, he describes it as possibly being one of the closest things we've got to a self-conscious virtual entity on the internet, even referencing it in an old intro screen for the game. In many ways, that sort of independent-minded section of the internet was what put Minecraft on the map, and so it wasn't completely beyond belief why he felt protective about it. I think in many ways, people like Notch saw these establishment types coming in and trying to dictate their own standards that much of the internet didn't perceive similarly. I think it's fair to say that although Notch's opinions on the matters in the previous part weren't completely out of nowhere given his background, they were somewhat different to many around him at the time, and it definitely alienated some people. When someone asked him why it seemed like everyone hated him now, he replied they didn't hate him, they agreed, but were just afraid to speak up. And as what he said received pushback, he became more and more stubborn, and in turn more and more irrational. Even if you agreed with any point he was making, it was lost in the sense that he was fighting a greater cultural battle. When an incident occurred at VidCon involving Anita Sarkeesian clashing heads with her critics, and Ant Green responding, he tagged Green telling him to be on the right side of history. That's a strong term for a situation that related to a commentary spat at a panel. At the end of Pride Month in 2017, there was a movement called Heterosexual Pride Day. Notch noticed this and stated that if you didn't support it, you deserved to be shot. Eventually, he did retract this statement and apologize, but it was clear that he was taking this all a little too seriously. It was clear that this was a historic battle to person for the soul of society, and this seemed to be influencing his political beliefs as well. In a May 2017 interview, then-President Donald Trump made the bold claim that he invented the phrase priming the pump, which is particularly impressive given that in modern terms, it was first applied in the 1930s, the decade before Trump was born. Mockery ensued, and many people took to their favorite social media site to take the piss, including video game writer and YouTube critic Mikey Newman. Person, after having the reference explained to him, makes the judgment that it is just more baseless Trump bashing because they are afraid, which certainly prompted some confusion. It seemed that as the months passed, Notch had become more preoccupied with this idea that every narrative against Trump was part of some greater conspiracy to prevent him from making America great again. And well, it's a bit far-fetched. The thing about a lot of conspiracy theories is that they do often start with one genuine observation. Were certain echelons of the media disproportionately outraged with Trump's presidency when they'd given others a pass? You could make an argument for it. You could say that they weren't anywhere near as critical as previous presidencies when they enacted policy that could significantly harm the population. However, the fallacious link comes when you conclude that therefore they hate Trump because he's finally doing the right thing, rather than the fact that he's unorthodox and generates views for financially focused businesses. There are plenty of people online who are quite aware of establishment shortcomings, but also felt like it was still valid to point out issues regarding Trump. When he makes a claim that he invented a term that existed before he was born, then yeah, I don't think it's unjustified to have a bit of a chuckle about it. However, Notch didn't seem to be seeing it this way, and neither were a lot of Americans. So with that in mind, let's talk about a little conspiracy theory that occurred the year before, known as Pizzagate. Pizzagate was the allegation that there was an insidious satanic underground sex ring being operated by the Clintons and Democrats out of a Washington, D.C. pizzeria. It was rooted in an email link from a Clinton campaigner which theorists claimed contained a secret code that tied all of this together, and eventually resulted in a gunman turning up to the pizzeria and firing his rifle at the institution. There were a deluge of other related incidents to the theory, which has widely been discredited by mainstream institutions. Emphasis on the mainstream institutions here. Now, that's not to say it has credit, I personally don't think it does. But when you believe a theory that dictates all authority figures are in on something, them telling you it doesn't exist isn't going to be convincing enough. Pizzagate mostly fizzled out after the 2016 election, particularly given that Donald Trump actually won. But in August 2017, Notch published a tweet stating that in fact, Pizzagate was real. A bit late to the party all things considered, but quite the claim regardless. In elaborating on his stance, he rants about binary politics and how there might actually be pieces of evidence that have supported this theory, but that it might also be drugs, though the pedestals do look like people in a police sketch, and the pizza place has weird art and branding, etc, etc, etc. There were already a lot of retorts online to the claims made in Notch's very long thread, but he seems certain something is up, and although people may perceive his thread as being a bit behind the current political discourse, it may not have been as unprompted as some people thought. On the forums like 4chan, this narrative had been brewing, but one that integrated a new perspective. That Donald Trump was aware and working to bring this worldwide satanic cabal down, and that it would only be a matter of time until many significant public figures were reprimanded and charged. Similar versions of this story had already been promoted on the poll section of 4chan, but come October this began to escalate. On the 27th of the aforementioned month, a user by the name of Q Clearance Patriot claimed that Hillary Clinton was soon going to be arrested, and civil unrest would follow. Q clearance is a level of clearance used for the Department of Energy. It gives you access to a variety of data that would otherwise be restricted to the public. The inference here being that this guy was someone high up in government, and he was speaking out due to his patriotic nature. This seemed to capture the imagination for many in the forum, and was followed quickly by another post that seemed to incriminate other popular Democratic figureheads and donors, implying that there would soon be a large-scale reckoning for all those who Trump viewed as criminal rogue elements. This would quickly manifest and grow, receiving more and more media attention and garnering a following from many committed Trump devotees. I think what happens to many people is the feeling of a greater cause and explanation for Trump's actions. He had always pledged to drain the swamp and deliver justice to a system that had legitimately been rigged against so many people. Q himself occupied this position of unfalsifiability, whose content could only be proven by time, and often leveraged on the belief of the individual, and it turned out that many were actually quite prepared to believe. Although Notch was not necessarily directly involved with anything QAnon related in its inception, and there's no direct evidence tying him to that, the correlation between his interest in Pizzagate and the founding of this sect of the internet seemed to imply that he was spending a bit too much time in these forums, and as he became more and more outspoken, people began to take notice. Make no mistake, Notch had definitely been pushing people's buttons online, but overall this hadn't affected his status related to his work at this point, likely because most of his tweets didn't have much staying power online and people didn't really care enough about some dude shouting into the void. He held steadfast on most of his opinions, but up to the end of 2018, he didn't seem to garner much attention outside the discourse sphere that he was involved in. However, there was the occasional reference to Operation Mockingbird, a theory that refers to the alleged brainwashing of the public through media propaganda, and had been regularly mentioned by those on QAnon, and Q himself who mentions it in his original post. Although it never attracted that much media attention, it was indicative of what he was doing with his time. However, as Notch's takes grew increasingly strong, there was a sense that what he was saying couldn't be ignored. This began in December 2018, which was met with a flurry of statements by person, some relating to race, some relating to general political identity, and just some relating to whatever the hell this is. He still presented himself as someone on the side of the little guy, but it seems he had identified a greater battle against those who were at the top, and the far left who were controlling every aspect of his life. If you were with them, you were ontologically evil. There was no two ways about it. Now, these tweets were definitely more concerning than the previous set. The least you could say about his comments up to this point was that although they were often provocative, the intended targets were often general concepts of political correctness, SJWs, and establishment figures, all of which were not without their flaws, even if the obsession with them was a bit overwrought on Notch's behalf. However, these tweets seem to harp on some other more questionable theories, in particular relating to IQ differences between racial populations. Now, this has been the subject of debate in certain scientific circles, with many broadly on the side of the opinion that IQ is not affected by race, more due to other environmental factors that may coincide with race. However, how does a human-generated spectrum of intelligence help discussion on racial differences? How would it dictate the world we live in? The truth is that people are still individuals, and anyone from any race can be really smart or really stupid. Notch had clearly grown to hate the general state of the gaming industry as he felt it was dictated by a small proportion of easily offended people. The left received a lot of the blame when companies made decisions that others thought they were being pressured into, but many of them were decisions ultimately made by the company. What would anyone who actually felt strongly about these matters done if the businesses in this industry just turned around to them and said, no, we're not doing that? Or just ignored them? Probably not much, maybe some angry tweets, but that would be it. And Notch had survived alright to this point. Despite the fact that he didn't have direct ties to any companies, he was still symbolically associated with Minecraft and commemorated in the game. However, come March 2019, Notch was once again ready to test that, and this time he was going all out. First mentioning Operation Mockingbird again, but then dropping any innuendo and just outwardly stating that Q was legit, and that we should not be trusting the media. To be honest, I don't trust the media too much either, but for someone who doesn't like binary politics, he sure likes to make binary choices. After a couple days of continuing to push these general narratives that the populace was being lied to by the establishment, he takes to Twitter to make the interesting observation that suddenly all the requests for him to stream and podcast have stopped. How curious. I guess the establishment decided that his time was nigh. But his Twitter was still growing, which is something, I guess. I mean, he was making up to 100 tweets a day. With Notch fully embracing the QAnon movement and the man behind it, he definitely raised a few eyebrows, with articles being published on his recent turn to conspiracy theories. However, not finished to his crusade, he turns his attention to a variety of matters. First drawing a comparison between dressing as another race and dressing as the opposite gender and saying there is no difference. This opinion didn't seem to attract too much traffic as it could be seen as referring to cross-dressing. However, not too long after, Notch was back to business on a plethora of fronts, sometimes posting rather vaguely, which attracted some QAnon responses, other times just cutting to the chase and reminding people that casual murdering of infants for organ harvesting purposes is not acceptable. Hard agree on that one, Notch. He then writes a thread seemingly going truth mode on society. You cannot negotiate with these people who are trying to destroy human civilization as we know it. At least that's what I take from the thread. Though the last two tweets seem more directed to the trans community, mentioning gender dysphoria and pronouns, including the claim that trans people are trying to make it illegal to use the wrong pronouns, even though actually it's them who have the pronouns wrong. This began to receive some serious pushback, especially from some of his trans followers who are particularly enthusiastic about Minecraft, with one sharing a pro-trans message in a My Little Pony format stating that trans women are women. Notch didn't appreciate that, and quote tweeted this person stating that they were wrong, and although trans women were deserving of support as much as anyone else, that anyone advocating for this position was evil, and feeding into a dangerous, mentally ill delusion, using his sister's body dysmorphia as an example. When further challenged on this, it seems he's more concerned about the authoritarian nature of many people to, quote, demand that they be addressed by specific pronouns. He stands his ground, states that it is illegal in many places already, and agreeing with another tweet that if they do this unquestionably, they will also be walking back women's rights, seemingly adopting a more trans-exclusionary radical feminist standpoint. Now, I do not know the law in every country or region, but the fact that Notch did not seem to cite any sources or even anecdotal content made these claims rather hard to work with, and when being asked what this all was about, he commented, "The Great Awakening," which is another event commonly referenced on QAnon where the greater population becomes aware of the truth. Notch seemed to be framing his tweets from the lens that he was punching up against an oppressive regime, but many people didn't seem to agree. Although it was true that certain industries were striving towards greater diversity, many didn't think it was really at the request of any specific demographic. It was more just a financially intelligent